So I've cancelled a lot of people over the last month. I've cancelled Chris Pratt. I've cancelled Salt Bay. It took a couple of videos, but we even got there with finally cancelling Mr. Beast. But how do you cancel someone who is already cancelled? How do you cancel someone who's been deplatformed off nearly every social media platform? Well, today we're going to be cancelling Alex Jones. And you guys have been calling me the Kavernacle, so I guess the Kavernacle arc is continuing. And once this video is done, nobody is going to platform Alex Jones ever again. So despite the kind of jokey intro, this video is going to be dealing with a lot of serious topics and serious issues, so massive trigger warning for a variety of stuff. I'm going to put on screen right now what we will be covering, so if you do not want to hear about any of this, please click off the video. But the resurgence of Alex Jones has been extremely concerning, especially during his defamation lawsuit that has been going on over the last couple months and years in various different degrees of various different lawsuits. But I'm still seeing him pop up on loads of different social media platforms, being platformed by massive channels. So what I wanted to do in this video is remind people what Alex Jones has actually done and all the lives he's destroyed, and him playing like this crazy man tinfoil hat character, if it is even a character, doesn't give you a pass to platform him when you think about all the lives he has destroyed by pushing the grossest and most baseless conspiracy theories, which has encouraged his followers to harass people non-stop and actually cause physical harm to people and people taking their own lives. So today what we're going to talk about is going to talk about the recent defamation case, talk about him being platformed by loads of people recently and my experience with him. Then we're going to go more into the harm he's caused with these conspiracy theories, about him being like a terrible father as well, and then finally finish off by talking about his early days and I guess speculating on, is he actually a character, which he claims to be sometimes, or is this just a deeply unhinged guy? So I'm not going to plug my socials today. All I will say is if you want to follow me on any social media platform, that is in the description. And of course, my work is made possible by my patrons. And it's actually a nice anniversary. It's actually a year since I quit my full-time job. I didn't actually expect to do YouTube full-time, but that happened this year and it's great. And I thank all the viewers and subscribers and also mainly the patrons. And yeah, if you want to see me continue to do this full-time, please consider becoming a patron. I'm trying to build it up with as many $1 to $3 pledges as possible, because if you want to build a sustainable Patreon, you want to get as many people as possible pledging small amounts. So what prompted this video? We're going to talk about that generally, but I saw this tweet from the host of the Red Scare podcast, and I've never actually heard of this before, but I see a couple of leftist people following it. Apparently it's a leftist podcast, but they do platform like controversial people, apparently in a bid to make them look stupid. But here they are in a picture, all smiling with Alex Jones, and apparently they went and shot guns and had a lovely day together. And it got me thinking, like, why would you platform this guy? If your goal is to make right-wingers look stupid, well, here's a guy whose whole shtick is just being a crazy man. Now, someone tweeted this, and I agree with it. Impossible to overstate how evil Alex Jones is. He tormented the parents of Sandy Hook victims, drove some of them to taking their own lives. Never listened to Red Scare, but this is a very bad look. I'm beginning to think these two are not good people, let alone leftists. But it's a trend that has been going on a lot of Alex Jones. Now, I find this one particularly gross, because if these people are leftists and they're platforming a guy like this, who when he filmed this was going through a defamation suit for this harassment of the Sandy Hook parents, like, I seriously don't know what's wrong with you, but it goes hand in hand with how much we've been seeing him pop up recently. So all the anti-SJW YouTubers actually platformed Alex Jones recently. You had people like Jeremy from Geeks and Gamers, Nerdrotic, and The Quartering all going on this panel show with him, hosted by Nerdrotic, I believe, and took him like very, very seriously. We're asking him questions about like left-wing media and how the lefts are ruining everything.
The one thing a lot of us, kind of what we talk about here on this show and what our world is, the wokeness of Hollywood and everything. And the question I get asked and all of us get asked, and I'm interested in your perspective on this, Where did it really start? Now, obviously, that's a deep question for someone like you. But where did it really start to show the cracks in the wokeness of Hollywood, in your opinion?
Yeah, that's a complex cultural question. And so it's really hard to give an accurate question. But I would say Hollywood was already collapsing by the time Obama got there. And then he was sold as like a Hollywood commodity. He'd bring humanity together, save everybody. And Americans wanted to really, stop racism. And then when he became a divider and a manipulator, and people saw Hollywood pushing him, it began to really crumble. And then when you have the internet, you know what killed Hollywood is the internet. Because and mainline television. So it's the internet and all these choices in Hollywood and big tech and legacy dinosaur media. They all were like, oh, no one will care about that. We'll still control it. We'll get some talent out of it like minor leagues, but we'll still be the dominant force. But then with Netflix and with Amazon and all these channels flooding bad productions, flooding bad actors, flooding wokeness, as soon as Hollywood began to realize 5-6 years ago they were losing control, a day late, a dollar short, then they go, okay, weaponize it and divide and conquer them and make them tune into it because it's political and hateful. But then that drove more people away. And so, okay, we'll take over late night comedy, take over the nightly shows, take over sports. That's it.
Part of why Hollywood, bounce off what Alex is saying, Hollywood felt like they could control culture before with these movies. And, like Friends, the TV show, everyone had the same freaking haircut as Ross. And everyone had the same haircut as Jennifer Aniston. People stopped looking up to them. So then they became political activists.
Speaking like them, Jeremy.
Right. Yeah, they use the same words.
Yeah, they're basically pissed that we left them. They were obsessed with controlling culture. And now they've just, like Count Dracula, opened up his cape and just are sending out all the poison gas.
All of these people pretty much are massive Trump supporters, just like Alex Jones, and they take him like fairly seriously despite how ridiculous he is. And then of course, I don't need to tell you, Alex Jones is best buddies with Joe Rogan, and Joe Rogan has platformed him multiple times after he's been banned from social media. And recently, both Alex Jones and Joe Rogan, along with Blair White and some other people, all got into Tim Pool's tiny trailer van or whatever this is and just had a big podcast.
Oh, it's Joe Rogan.
There you go. So Joe Rogan in the house.
Alex Jones, ladies and gentlemen, right about basically everything. Finally, it's all coming down. The truth is coming out.
So while we've got Joe here, let me just ask this one question of Joe.
The amount of people that actually pay attention to all this.
I'm blinded by the fact that I'm informed. That's a good point.
Yeah, you're very informed.
So
you're always on it.
Credit him right there. But let me ask Joe before he's got to go here. He's got to go to a comedy show tonight. Let me ask Joe his view, shifting gears on the political correct wars.
But hold on. Keep talking about this because this is an important thing to expand on what we're talking about here. And what I'm saying is, why did he have to do that?
Wait,
we had to do that because everything was falling apart.
Right. No, but
So Joe, elaborate. Joe, elaborate.
Can I just say one sentence?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Joe, I got a question for you. I know I'm not trying to change subjects because the Rittenhouse thing's huge and anarchy's all. What about Joe Biden? Because you early on said he's senile a year before he got in.
Everybody said it. It wasn't anything.
Well, let me ask you then. That's my next question. Joe, everything's collapsing. Your show is the epicenter of everybody leaving the establishment and going to independent. How does dinosaur media finally die? Because if Joe Rogan's the meteorite that hit the planet and kills the dinosaurs.
Very clear, like Alex Jones and Joe Rogan have a friendship there. But yes, despite Alex Jones being cancelled, apparently, and being deplatformed and everything like that, he's still going strong in terms of the media space, and he's still being platformed by Tim Pool, one of the biggest political YouTube channels, on this Red Scare pod, which seems to have a big following among certain leftists, and of course, among anti-SJW nerd YouTubers who are very prominent in covering comics and movies and games and stuff like that. So many of you watching this will be like, what's the problem? Alex Jones is a funny man. We don't take him seriously, blah, blah, blah. But now let's get into how Alex Jones is an awful person who's ruined people's lives. So thankfully, reporting from November 15th, Alex Jones found liable in lawsuit brought by parents of Sandy Hook shooting victims. Controversial radio and TV personality Alex Jones was found liable Monday for damages in a lawsuit brought by the parents of the Sandy Hook elementary school shooting victims. Judge Barbara Bellis found Jones liable for damages by default because Jones and his companies like InfoWars showed callous disregard for the rules of discovery. She previously faulted the InfoWars host for failing to comply for requests for documents and other procedures. The ruling sends the case to a jury to award the family's damages without a civil trial. It is legal a victory for 8 parents of Newtown's victims who sued Jones for defamation after he called the shooting a hoax. Plaintiffs earlier alleged a years-long campaign of abusive and outrageous false statements in which Jones and the other defendants have developed and amplified and perpetuated claims that the Sandy Hook massacre was staged and the 26 families who lost loved ones that day are paid actors. The judge agreed with the families that Jones, InfoWars, and his other companies failed to turn over documents to the families that they would need to prove their case as required by law. The defendants were ordered to produce the documents. Discovery is not supposed to be a guessing game. What the Jones defendants have produced by way of analytics is not even remotely full and fair compliance. Jones was similarly defaulted in Texas for failing to turn over documents. So defaulting in this type of trial is actually really, really rare, and it shows how much contempt Alex Jones had for the court that he wouldn't defend himself and he wouldn't hand over these documents. Why did Alex Jones do this? Probably to say, which he has said, that it is a political witch hunt. These are show trials. It's not a fair trial. So for his followers, him not turning over this evidence and losing by default proves that to people. Now, I haven't really seen the recent coverage really deep dives into how awful Alex Jones has been with this stuff and how it has deeply affected the families of people affected by the tragedy at Sandy Hook. So I wanted to read some of their own quotes for you today, just to hammer home how damaging this guy has been and how justified it is that he is being sued. And I really hope the jury award like a massive figure to these families, not only to help them heal and have that closure, but to really bankrupt Alex Jones and really end any influence he has. And everyone who platforms him and is friends with him while this trial was going on should be like deeply, deeply ashamed of themselves and disgusted with themselves. Like how they can platform this guy after this stuff, I just can't even understand it. So to start with, I want to talk about the Posner family and mainly Leonard Posner. So an article by The Guardian on 2017 where Hadley Freeman interviewed him and his son Noah Posner was killed in the shooting. So just days after, when the US was still reeling from the tragedy and Posner himself was, he says, pretty much in a catatonic state, the theory started spreading. Sandy Hook had never happened. It was staged by actors. The children hadn't existed. It was a ruse by Obama. The hoaxers poured over photos of the family and children on social media and pointed to any visual similarities they could find between the children and living ones. Families were harassed by hoaxers online and off, insisting that they stop their fake grieving. When Posner roused himself from his catatonic grief to post photos of Noah online, hoaxers would leave comments like fake kid. So remember, this is back in 2017. The week before our interview, a judge issued a warrant for the arrest of Lucy Richard. She is alleged to have sent messages to Posner, including one that read, "Death is coming to you real soon and there's nothing you can do about it." That was bad, Posner agrees, but not necessarily the most unsettling. After all, others have put photo of his house on the web and reported him to Child Protection Services. "This is the world I deal with now," says Posner. Posner himself used to be into conspiracy theories. When he lived in Connecticut, he often had to commit to New York. And how's this for a weird turn of events? And he would listen to right-wing radio hosts such as Alex Jones and Michael Savage on long drives. "I'm self-employed, an entrepreneur. I was always looking for more information so I could get the edge on the next guy to get a better idea of the geopolitical perspective." Posner says, once he got used to Jones' raspy voice, he liked him especially. Alex Jones appears to think out of the box. He's entertaining. Arguably, more than anyone, Jones is responsible for spreading the conspiracy theories. His radio show and website Infowars.com have an audience of more than 8 million, and they specialize in these kind of conspiracies. On the 27th of January 2013, Jones told his audience, "In the last month and a half, I have come out and said it was clearly staged. Unfortunately, evidence began to come out that points more and more in that direction. I wasn't very verbal at that point, but I managed to send Alex Jones an email," says Posner. He wrote, "Haven't we had our share of pain and suffering? I used to enjoy listening to your shows. Now I feel that your type of show created these hateful people and they need to be reeled in." So this guy actually directly messaged Alex Jones to get him to stop. Alex Jones' assistant replied, "Alex has no doubt this was real, but Jones's thinking seemed to change. In 2015, he told his audience it was fake. with actors, in my view, manufactured, and I couldn't believe it at first. I knew they had actors there, clearly, but I thought they had some real kids, and it just shows how bold they are. They clearly use actors. So a more recent interview in 2019 with NPR, and Lenny speaks a bit more on this stuff. They're talking about 2014 again. He says, during the time I was in contact with some of the deniers, I'd published information about Noah, about his life and about his death. So I published his death certificate, and after doing so, I was accused of publishing a fake one, and that had turned into a larger work titled Nobody Died at Sandy Hook, which was published over 400 pages. So in the book, I was accused of faking this certificate and also lying about other things. So in a lawsuit, I had to show a lot of information about Noah's life, prove that he lived. I took a DNA test, I took a sample of Noah, and a DNA test was taken by Noah's mother as well to prove that in court that I am Noah's father and Noah lived and Noah died. So all that information had to be actually presented in court. So can you just think about how traumatic that has to be for someone? Not only do you lose your child in this awful, awful tragedy, then you start getting harassed by all these Alex Jones inspired lunatics, despite telling him personally to knock it off, some guy you actually used to listen to. Then someone publishes a book about it, and in the lawsuit against them, you actually have to prove that your child even existed in the first place. Imagine having to deal with that, and who fanned the flames of that stuff? It was Alex Jones. There's a reason these families are suing him and have won this by default. Now this guy, when he gives any appearance in the media, he actually wears prosthetic makeup so people can't find him, and he's moved house like 8 times. This is what Alex Jones has done to this grieving father's life. Essentially destroyed his life with these crazy, disgusting conspiracy theories. But also, Alex Jones gets more disgusting because one of the fathers of the Sandy Hook victims has actually taken his own life in recent years. Jeremy Rickman. Rickman and his wife, Jennifer Hensel, were among the plaintiffs in a defamation suit against Jones. Now, the family have been quite private about this, but no doubt, probably a lot of harassment would contribute to a deteriorating mental state of a person who's gone through such an awful tragedy and is having to deal with these legal things just to get some closure. How did Alex Jones respond to this thing? Jones saying, "We have no idea whether he was even murdered at this point. Why would some anti-gun guy do this? This is really sad. My prayers go out to him and his family, and we wish for the truth of whatever really happened here to come out. We don't know yet, and we'll see. The corporate media says outrageous lies, but it's what they do. And look, the good news of no collusion, the good news that I'm not a Russian agent comes out, and now this happens right on time. Just amazing." There's also Alex Jones-inspired people who've been charged. Wolfgang Halbig, 73, was arrested and charged with unlawful possession of personal identification in Lake County, Florida, and accused of tormenting Sandy Hook parent Lenny Posner and others connected to the tragedy. In a statement to ABC News, Alex Jones said, "I think Halbig's obsessed with proving himself right, and I think back when he was first investigating it, he was sane, but I think he's cracked under the pressure. I wish the media would just drop the Sandy Hook thing and stop putting words in my mouth and using stuff that's happened in the past as a way to bring Sandy Hook back up in my name, while at the same time claiming I'm the one bringing it up." Among the identifying information was Posner's social security number and date of birth. Halbig allegedly sent the information to hundreds of people via email, including law enforcement and members of the media. So again, Red Scare Pod, Tim Pool, Joe Rogan, the Anti-SJWs on YouTube. You really think you're good people for platforming this guy, treating him as like respectable, or even just some funny man to laugh at, when he is literally destroyed the lives of people who have suffered awful tragedy? And Alex Jones has a lot of kids as well, and he's still doing this. And not only that, he's still commenting on this stuff and the harassment years and years later. Do people just have such short memories? This stuff has been going on for years. The lawsuits have been going on for years. And recently, he's been found guilty by default for not cooperating with the lawsuits themselves. And you still want to platform this guy. Now, by all accounts, especially his wife, Alex Jones is actually a terrible father as well. So that is not surprising. So I want to talk about this stuff for a bit as well. So Austin American Statesman, which reports on a lot of this stuff because it's Texas-based like Jones himself. It says, Alex Jones' ex-wife rebuffed in bid to gain daughter's custody. Alex Jones and Kelly Jones both live in Austin. The two girls live with Alex Jones most of the time, spending 2 hours every Thursday and every other weekend with their mother. The Joneses' 17-year-old son lives exclusively with his father. Jones and his second wife, Erica Wolf Jones, also have a 3-year-old. They were awarded joint custody after a jury trial in 2017, and for the first time since their divorce, Kelly Jones gained the right to have the two girls and their brother primarily live with her, but a series of orders by State District Judge Orlinda Naranjo, who presided over the trial, left the girls living most of the time and the boy with their father. At a pre-trial hearing before the 2017 trial, attorney Randall Wilhit told the judge that using Alex Jones's on-air InfoWars persona to evaluate Alex Jones as a father would be like judging Jack Nicholson in a custody dispute based on his performance as Joker in Batman. He's playing a character, he's a performance artist, but Jones repudiated that strategy. Then in early March 2020, Kelly had filed another emergency motion with Livingston, seeking to remove her two daughters from her husband's home immediately after he was arrested for driving while intoxicated, though his blood level alcohol was just below the legal limit. The motion noted that Erica Wolf Jones was also arrested for driving while intoxicated in August. Her blood alcohol level in her breath test far exceeded the legal limits. In both cases, the arrests resulted from one spouse calling the police about the other. And a bit earlier in 2017, Alex Jones's son Rex Jones also went on InfoWars and went on a crazy rant, but Kelly Jones, Alex Jones brainwashed my son. So I'm horrified by what Alex has done. What he's done is horrifically endangering and exploitative of our son by placing him in the middle of the most charged topic of the country. Kelly continued to say Rex has been brainwashed and has been used as a weapon by Alex. Kelly said she's asked YouTube to take the video down but hasn't received an answer yet. So despite her influence and Alex Jones's rise, because it's well documented she actually was kind of like a driving force behind his success, I do really feel bad for the mother and her children, because imagine growing up both with this guy but also while he is facing multiple lawsuits for something awful that he's done, and then both your guardians in this situation as the children, the two young girls and the teenage boy, have been arrested for drunk driving and they've called the police on each other. What sort of environment is that for children? And I really do not understand how Alex Jones has even got custody of these children. Now, this guy, for being such a self-described alpha male, does seem to be a bit of a coward a lot of the times. You know, he says when he originally made up this conspiracy theory, he was going through psychosis, but when challenged on it, he said, well, he wasn't actually going through legitimate psychosis. It was like the media making him feel crazy, so he thought he couldn't trust anything.
I myself have, almost had like a form of psychosis back in the past where I basically thought everything was staged, even though I've now learned a lot of times things aren't staged. So, I think as a pundit and someone giving opinion, that, my opinions have been wrong, but they were never wrong consciously to hurt people.
You said false things about Sandy Hook because of the psychosis.
Well, I'm going to say,
correct?
Well, I'm just saying that the trauma of the media and the corporations lying so much, then everything begins, you don't trust anything anymore.
Okay.
Kind of like a child whose parents lie to them over and over again. Well, pretty soon they don't know what reality is. So long before these lawsuits, I said that in the past I thought everything was a conspiracy, and I would kind of get into that mass groupthink of the communities that were out there saying that. So now I see that it's more in the middle. And so that's where I stand.
And then his lawyer is saying, like, he is actually an actor. This is all an act. And if you believe Alex Jones, you're an idiot. And it's just ridiculous they did even compare it to, like, Jack Nicholson's Joker. So one more thing I wanted to touch on was Alex Jones's early days. And there's a really good article by The Observer, The Alex Jones Origin Story on Austin Public Access TV. His act was never an act. But I want to get into his personality and if this is actually an act, because a lot of people who knew him don't seem to think it is, and they think his whole thing is kind of like Donald Trump. It comes from a place of really, really deep insecurity. 22-year-old Alex Jones ranted about black helicopters, the Illuminati, and how NASA faked the moon landing. Right from the start, Jones was always the paranoid, screaming conspiracy theory guy who'd be setting the rest of the world straight and never yielded to common sense, truth, or fact. He was amusing at first in a crazy tinfoil hat kind of way, said Shelley Tumbleson, another former ACA TV producer, which Alex Jones was on. But then came the very uncomfortable realization that what we saw on TV wasn't an act. In the coming months, I would meet him in person and find that he was the exact same person off camera as he was in front of me. So another one of his associates, Sotelo, saying, I remember him taking classes. I remember him going on the air. He was easily rattled in those days. He was defenseless. He was 22 years old and put himself on TV for the first time. From the onset, Sotelo said Jones's whole act was, I'm burdened by how much knowledge I have and I have to share it with you guys because it's my duty. And he was burdened by his responsibility to society. It was all made up. It was just an act. I don't feel he believes what he's saying. I think he's just looking for a thing to say that's going to get him through this particular broadcast. And next time, he'll worry about it next time. Carry on, a local comedian at the time, also says he seemed like one of those guys whose dad was a doctor or kind of rich, and as a kid he got everything, that he got a car when he was 16, a Mustang or something. You know, everything was kind of given to him. That was my impression back in the days. And Alex Jones's dad was rich and he's a dentist, and Alex Jones used to actually work for him. From the beginning though, Sotelo knew Jones was trouble. He'd walk into a room and see Jones cornering an ACA TV employee. Alex is right next to their desk talking about some them. I did this, I did that, talking about his 185 IQ. He was a joke. Everyone avoided him. He just cornered you and he wouldn't let you go. He was like a child who couldn't understand that everyone could tell you were lying. It was just constant tall tales. It was just the way he communicated. He didn't know how to be normal. He had to be boasting. He had to talk about how accomplished he was or how popular he was. I mean, every single thing out of his mouth was image manipulation. Sotelo believes that Jones's entire psyche comes from a place of deep insecurity. He also sees Jones and his personality disorder in tune with another controversial figure he helped push into office. He's pretty much Donald Trump. What started off as, look at this silly joke, ended up being, oh no, this guy's going to be a monster. And he just got good at that and people started buying it. So I think that is like a nice way to get into the ending of this video, is that Alex Jones was always this deeply insecure, polarizing figure who had his mind completely warped by conspiracy theories. And he was always this way, and he's this way in private and in public, which obviously plays into him being a terrible, terrible father, but is also a bit of a coward who, you know, is taking on the man. But often when he's criticized, especially when it comes to law stuff, he hides away, says it's an act, says he had psychosis, said he wasn't in his right mind when he said all of this stuff. But like one of his former associates said, he always thought he was going to be dangerous because he had, you know, this act which wasn't really being done by too many other people. He actually had some good connections, like Richard Linklater, who put Alex Jones in some of his movies, and he knew some other famous comedians from Austin at the time as well. So his trajectory to, I guess, fame started from a very, very young age, but this guy was always dangerous, and he's been proven to be dangerous with how many lives he has ruined, just in terms of the one conspiracy he was pushing. Like, imagine how many lives he's ruined in terms of like how many people's brains he has turned to mush in America. And in the comments, please let me know, do you have any family members who have had their whole, I guess, attitude, thinking skills, worldview shaped by either Alex Jones or Alex Jones and other things like him? Because I'm sure many people have had their families ripped apart and their parents like taken away from them, or their sons taken away from them by buying in to what Alex Jones is selling. But again, like I said earlier, are people's memories really so short? Why are people platforming this guy? I really don't get it. It's all for clout. It's all for fame. People like Red Scare Pod and stuff, I honestly don't know how you're meant to be like socially progressive, have good politics, and platform a guy who has literally led harassment against people who've experienced an unimaginable tragedy. Some have taken their lives. Some of them have had to move their house multiple times, can't even show their face in public, have been harassed by the worst kinds of people, and you pose for a picture smiling with him while you have a nice day out. And then people like the Quartering and Jeremy from Geeks and Gamers, who generally agree with Alex Jones's politics, also platforming him and influencing other people who may get their first experience with this guy while he interacts with their favorite YouTubers. And of course, Joe Rogan's probably the worst offender in that he has this absolutely massive podcast and constantly platforms Alex Jones as one of his mates, like he is just a funny drunk guy spouting off nonsense, not that he's actually caused really, really serious harm to people. And thankfully, although it was by default and not him actually fighting his case in court, thankfully he is going to face consequences finally. But also, we talk about cancel culture. This guy hasn't been cancelled despite having everything thrown at him because people keep platforming him. And if you want his influence to stop platforming him. And I think it shows how depraved people like Joe Rogan and the Anti-SJWs are, in that despite all this stuff, they will keep platforming him. And, you know, I don't know much about Red Scare Pod, but you'd think, you know, people might know better. And Alex Jones is this monster. At the end of the day, no one with a good conscience should be platforming this guy who has caused so much destruction to people's lives. And the reason I make the cancel culture jokes all the time, because cancel culture doesn't exist. You can be Alex Jones and you still find yourself platforms, and even some of the biggest platforms on the internet you still go on despite, you know, facing lawsuits, despite people hating you, despite defaulting in this trial, so you are going to have to pay damages. But it doesn't matter, he's famous, he has connections, so we still see him everywhere. But that is it for the video. Pretty depressing topic. Please just don't see Alex Jones as like some harmless funny guy. He is deeply, deeply damaging. But anyway, if you want to follow me on social media at the Kavernacle on Twitter and Instagram, if you want to support my work, check out my Patreon. If you want to join our communities, have a look at my Discord and my subreddit. And if you made it this far, thank you for watching.